Well, Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is Torah study for a Shabbos, and I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein here in beautiful Southern California, sunny Southern California, joined this Shabbos by my dear friend and teacher, Rabbi Mark Gelman of South Florida. Mark, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. It's sunnier here. It's better here. Lower taxes here. Just saying. Just saying.
Just saying, just
The
saying.
word, wait, Boca Raton. Boca Raton.
Boca Raton, right, right. The
Okay.
mouth of the Raton.
The mouth
Um,
of the rat.
that's exactly right. So this week, we enter a new chapter in our study of Torah. This week, we turn the page from the active discussion of liberation and then to the covenant with God at Mount Sinai. And we begin a section, the last third of the book of Exodus. It's actually five weekly Torah portions, which deals with the construction and of the Mishkan. The word Mishkan is translated as tabernacle, which is a weird word. Mishkan literally means a dwelling place. And what the people of Israel are going to do is to create a portable dwelling, a portable Mount Sinai. They have met God at Mount Sinai, and God has said, I want to live with you. And so they are given the design and the commandment to create a dwelling for God in the world. And that's what this Mishkan is going to be. It's going to be the place where human beings can meet God. Wherever we go, there is a connection between heaven and earth. Now, on its surface, this is a radical idea because the ancient world understood that gods, as it were, showed up on holy mountains, at holy trees, at holy rivers, on holy rocks. And those things, you had to go there in order to encounter the God. This is the first time that I know of in human history that you have an idea where God says, "Well, I'm going to come with you. Build me a carrier, build me a vehicle, and I will come with you. Asuli mikdash, make for me a holy place. V'shachanti b'tocham, and I will dwell within you, within your people, within the narrative of this people." So the first question mark is, what does this have to do with the liberation narrative that began the book of Exodus? That's the first great question. And the second great question is, how on earth can human beings build an
Yeah.
institution or a structure that would carry the infinity of God?
Okay. I love it when you ask me questions that no human being can answer. I
Well,
love that.
you're a rabbi. You're
I mean,
supposed to know these
and
things.
you're my friend. And
Right.
you're
Well,
my
you're, but
friend, and you do that to me.
I love you. Go ahead.
I love you too. Okay. So here's my swing and a miss at two impossible questions. The most impossible of which, by the way, is how do you make a house for God? But let's begin with a proper translation of Vasuli Mikdash V'Shachanti B'Tocham. You translated it, of course, perfectly, because you're only capable of translating it perfectly. But our students should understand that it doesn't say what it should say, which is build me a house that I might dwell in it. Right? The object of the sentence is the house, right? Build me a house.
Right.
It's not the people, it's build me a Mishkan, build a Suli Mishkan. So then the right conclusion to it is that I might dwell in it. But that's not what it says. It doesn't say, build me a house that I might dwell in it. It's build me a house that I might dwell in them.
You're in you,
Yeah, betocham,
in
in them,
them.
in them. Third person plural. And there it is. There's the answer to the whole question. The house isn't God's house. It's only a symbol. The dwelling of God in the world is the Jewish people, and ultimately all people who are made in the image of God. We are God in the world. That is the piece of God that's in the world. There's a whole lot of God that's way outside the world as the creator of every world and everything. But in our little bubble, God is in the world through us. So then the question is, okay, good. If God is in the world through us, what do you need a house for? Right? What do you need a house? And my answer to that, like most of my answers, are Gelman weird. This is a weird Gelman answer. The answer is cemetery is graves in cemeteries. Okay, that's the answer. It comes during debates, which we haven't really had here, and we should have one week, about cremation versus burial, because 90% of deaths in Japan are cremations. And now in America, I don't know what the final numbers are, but it's coming close to a majority of dead Jews are cremated and not buried, primarily for economic reasons, but also because of the transitoriness of their kids. They don't live where everyone lives in one city forever and ever. You could go out to the cemetery and visit. But why do you need a grave? What's my argument for a grave? My argument for a grave is you need a sacred place. People need certain places that are different than other places, just like they need certain times that are different than other times. There's limud, there's chol and kadosh for time, sacred and profane time, and there's sacred and profane space. One of the great sacrifices of our diaspora existence since the destruction of the temple and until the founding of the state of Israel, one of the consequences is we didn't have sacred space anymore. We had to go from town to town, country to country. And we had Jerusalem in our memory, but we had Sinai in our memory, but we didn't have it as a place. We didn't control it on any level. And for many decades and centuries, we couldn't even visit it. So the reason that we need a house for God is the reason that we need graves, because we need sacred places to go and put a little pebble and to say, here, this is where your grandpa is buried. This is what he was like. This is surrounded by a fence. This is sacred space. This is a sacred plot. And it's a sacred building. The Mishkan is a sacred building. This is so natural for other people. We, as cosmopolitan Jews, forget it, but we shouldn't. For example, you go to Australia, the Aborigines worship the biggest rock in the world, I think, Ayers Rock. It's a gigantic boulder.
I've been.
And of course, Native Americans have certain sacred lands that they worship. And of course, Hindus believe in the Ganges River as sacred land. We needed the Mishkan because we needed an alternative to Egypt. We needed an alternative place where we could say, God may move all over the place, and you're right that that is a unique Jewish theological innovation, but we still need a place. We still need a place, and that place where Moses can talk to God, certain things can happen that don't happen in other places.
Mm-hmm.
And where the building of the Mishkan will allow people to be active participants in their liberation. And that's my answer to the impossible.
So elaborate on that. So we noticed when we talked about liberation from Egypt that very much on purpose, the Israelite people were solely spectators in the process, right?
Yeah.
And that this was entirely God's doing. Even in the Haggadah, you have that line which hammers this home. Lo al yedei seraph, lo al yedei malach. It wasn't a seraph and it wasn't a malach. And it certainly wasn't your own political action that liberated you. It was me, God, who liberated you. So in the Bible, people Israel don't do anything. God brings the plagues, God destroys the Pharaoh, God splits the sea, they cross the sea, God drowns the Pharaoh, brings us to Mount Sinai. All we do is stand there. God comes down on the mountain and talks to us. We are passive, God is active. We are recipients. God is the broadcaster, the sender of liberation. All of a sudden here, the story changes. Moses is told, take from every Israelite asher nidivat libo, whatever his or her heart moves them to give. And then he gives them instructions. I want gold and I want silver and I want copper and I want leather and I want fabrics and I want all this stuff because we're going to use
Dolphin skins. Don't forget the dolphin
dolphins.
skins.
That's your famous dolphin skins.
Right.
All of a sudden, we become active participants. What's the significance of that?
The significance is we are now part, as it says in Shabbat 10b, we are partners with God in the act of creation. That's what it shows. We are partners. There was a dispute among the rabbis, and Rav Kook got involved in it and later in Israel. The rabbis, in a famous midrash, why is it that we're created on the sixth day? And one answer is so that we can't be arrogant because cockroaches were created before us. And my favorite answer is so we would never say we were partners with God in the act of creation. So I wrote one of my first midrashim, for modern midrashim, called Partners. It's the one most people know about and use. And that idea was my affirmation that we are partners with God, because the later rabbis in Shabbat 10 say, yeah, we are partners. So the Mishkan gives people a way to be partners. I told you before we went on that I just spoke to a group of compassionate friends. That's the name of their organization. These are parents whose children have died, who have lost a child. And we were talking about ways of getting out of their grief or putting their grief aside for a little so they could not suffocate with their grief. And one of the ways that they all agreed was helpful was serving others. Go to a soup kitchen, go serve lunch for somebody else, and see if that affects the way you're grieving for your own child, gets you out of yourself. So the Mishkan serves a similar purpose. It gets them out of the agonies of their exodus. It gets them out of the comfort of slavery. And it says, we're going to do this for God. We're going to say thank you. It's in a way, the whole story is actually funny because it's like what your parents told you the very first time they gave you the line every parent has given every child after they get something. What do you say? What do you say? And you can't, the world stops until you say, thank you, grandpa, thank you, grandma. So the Mishkan is a communal thank you from the Jewish people to God. Plus, if you have tablets, let's look at the practical element of it. If you have tablets that were brought down the mountain, what do you put them in a bag? You put them in a leftover bag? What do you do with them?
Samsonite. That's why Samsonite was invented.
Exactly.
A rolling
Everything
bag.
in our house, by the way, is in a plastic bag from a supermarket.
Right,
You have
of
to look
course.
in. What was that I had?
Right.
So, in a way, it was a necessity. Now, I have a particular view about this because my father was an architect. May his memory be blessed, Sal Gelman. And he spent a lot of time talking to me about space and light. And he would take me to Frank Lloyd Wright buildings and show me how this genius architect created an interplay of space and light. And one year, Betty and I were coming back from Israel, and we stopped in France, and we went to Chartres, which is the location of the most beautiful of all the Gothic cathedrals. And there was some holiday going on, and we snuck up the steps to look down on it. And the sun was coming through the Rosetta window. And all the priests and bishops and cardinals in their colored cassocks and were walking, and there was smoke and there was gold. And I said to Betty, you're building a house for God? This is as close as I've ever seen to a perfect house for God.
Mm.
It just lifted you up, that which was the point of the nave, the point of the height of the Gothic cathedral.
Right.
Was to get you out of your soul breathlessly up, look up.
Upward.
To God.
Right. Right.
So,
make you feel small too.
Exactly. And I think this hopefully will lead us to a transition here. When I look at synagogues, I don't have that breathlessness.
Mm.
I think you have a wonderful synagogue. I think I love your sanctuary. It could easily be an assembly hall for a high school. It has about that. I mean, I love you. I love VBS. If you want to build a whole new thing, I'll contribute to it.
Mm-hmm.
But let me just say, Chart, it ain't. Okay?
So this raises a wonderful question, though. It's a very powerful question you're raising, which is, first of all, in the Jewish faith embraced the second commandment that we will make no images of divinity in the world out of physical things. And so there's always been a sort of allergy to physical holy objects, right? Plus the fact that we're a portable people, so we're always running. We didn't have time and we didn't have the leisure to invest ourselves in physical symbols.
That's the reason.
Physical buildings, physical symbols.
Yeah.
And when you think about exactly that, what you think about the great cathedrals of Europe, when you also think about just religion and its accoutrements, the objects of religion. But what you said earlier is so very true. The contrary impulse is to say, I need a place. I need a sacred place in order to feel the sanctity of God's presence in life. I need a sacred place to remember. I need a sacred place to tell a story. I need symbols that carry with them the narratives and the values, right? And so there's a sort of contest here. And Jews have never had an emphasis on stuff in the same way, for example, that the Catholic Church has great religious stuff, right? Jewish families have candlesticks and a Chanukiah, yeah, right, and
It's
Pesach,
embarrassing.
Pesach dishes or Pesach cups, but compared to say a Catholic church, we don't have very much stuff, right?
Right.
In fact, what's fun, of course, just as an aside, is to go into one of the local Jewish stores and see the new kind of ritual objects they're trying to sell us now, right? For a while, it was this thing where you made kiddush over a cup and you poured it in and it spritzed the cup out into 8 other cups so that everybody at the table got one. And like
That's
you
a
needed
German
one
design.
of these.
That's a German design.
Yeah, or tzedakah boxes, or I mean, the most famous one of all, if you go to the Israel Museum, of course, are the Havdalah boxes or spice boxes, and how beautifully ornate that they are.
Yes, yes.
But there isn't a lot of Jewish material culture. But what you're saying is something very important, that's a lack, that we're missing something.
Definitely. And don't lay it all off on the second commandment, although you're very right in bringing it up, because Islam has the same limitations we do.
Yeah.
In fact, more extreme than us. You can't have any picture of anything in a masjid. You can't have it. They only have verses from the Quran. And yet, if you look at the Blue Mosque in Constantinople, it's a breathtaking space.
Right.
It's a breathtaking space of course, it became a church and then Hagia Sophia and so that, but it was a mosque. And so the fact of the matter is, there can be great religious spaces, but we are not the possessors of any of them. I
Right.
mean, we really don't have it.
Well,
People
not just spaces, but objects too. I'll give you.
and object, yeah, that's the smaller items. Yes, that's
Right. We
right.
just had this experience here. Many of our families were ordered to evacuate from their homes
Yes,
in
yes, of
advance
course.
of the fires last month. And one of the things people came to shul that week, and one of the discussions that we had is like,
What did you take?
what did I take? Right. Right? Pictures of the kids, candlesticks from my mother, and what didn't you take? What were the things that are of presumable importance that could stay behind because I could replace them? And what are the things of deep intrinsic sanctity to me and to my family?
I was not a good fundraiser. I admit this. Tommy Hartman was the best I ever saw, but it was added. He was aided by the fact that he made $25,000 a year.
Hmm.
So when he went to a billionaire to ask him for money, the guy couldn't say to Tommy, "Look at how you're living." He was vulnerable, and Tommy was a brilliant fundraiser. But one time I was raising money from someone for an expansion to our synagogue, and they were giving me a problem. I said, listen, it comes down to this. A first class synagogue needs a first class building.
Hmm.
There's just no exceptions to that. You need a first class building if you're a first class synagogue. That's the way it is. And he said, yeah, you're right. And I see this lack of physicality, of physical spiritual beauty in Judaism. I see it when I visit homes and say, how are there any Jewish objects that are on display, or what is the Jewish stuff that you have in your house? And when I marry couples, one of the first things I do in premarital counseling is I say, look, I don't care how much money you ever make together. Hope it's a lot, hope it's enough for you. But one thing I want is whatever level you're living at, I want the Jewish stuff in your house to be on that level.
Hmm.
If you become fabulously wealthy, I want to see some fabulous Jewish items in your home.
Mhm. That's a beautiful statement.
Because and if you're poor, fine. So you have what you have. But it should be at the level that everything else in your house is at.
Hmm.
So the question I have now is a very personal one as a retired rabbi from my beloved Temple Beth Torah. What does it take what is the spiritual health of the synagogue in this year?
Right. So this Torah portion marks the creation of the first religious institution of the Jewish people. When God says, "Asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocha," make me a vehicle. What we're talking about is an institution. It's not just a place. It's not
Yeah,
just an object. It's a social organization that's going to carry God into the world. And so that occasions us, the two of us, to have our annual State of the Synagogue conversation, which we've had now for some years going forward, because both of us devoted a great deal of our lives to
yeah.
this institution of the synagogue. And as you look across the landscape of American Judaism, what's happened to it? What is happening to it? Whether does it have a future? Does it have a life going forward? Let's take a moment. I think the question is a great moment. One thing I will point out that's happened, at least in our corner of the world, and I suspect it's happened in many corners of the world, is that two converging remarkable developments which we couldn't have foreseen. Number one, coming out of COVID, there has been a baby boom, right? We now have a wait
Surprise,
list.
surprise.
Well, it's like nothing on Netflix tonight. Let's go to bed, honey.
Right.
And we have a wait list in our nursery school because there's all these 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds who are now in the community. They've arrived in the world, and families that thought they were done with a kid now have another one. That's the first thing that's happened. The second thing is that after October 7th, and I don't know how long this will last, but after October 7th, there was a surge in people's interest in things Jewish within our community, a surge in a desire to be together as Jews, to be part of a community. And I think people came here to the synagogue and to its schools largely out of a desire to connect with something. Now, again, I don't know how long-lived this is going to be. As crises wane, things go back to sort of the mean, but the normal. But at least for the moment, there seems to be an upsurge in affiliation and in commitment and in desire to explore what it means to be part of a Jewish community. So I think these things might be feeding the Jewish communal world at the moment.
All right. So here we go into a tough moment. When I was the interim rabbi in Aspen, and you were visiting, and we did a program at the Aspen synagogue about the future of the synagogue. You came with your normal, buoyant, optimistic, hopeful self, and I told the truth. And at the end of it, they hated me. They hated me, and they loved you. And they said, we hired the wrong guy. We should have hired Eddie. And I laughed. Yeah, you should have. But I told him the truth, and I want to reaffirm the truth tonight. First of all, and the message, not to bury the lead here, is the synagogue is in dire straits and in deep trouble. Okay? So, and here's the proof for this. Aside from the numbers, which are disastrously low, and you can pick, it's so bad, the state of Jewish life is so bad that you can pick any number you want. If you want to pick number of rabbinical students enrolled in study, I think I was ordained with 40 guys and one woman, Sally Presan, in 1972. Now the entire, I think there's 12 or 13 students maybe. So we have virtually no one studying for the rabbinate. We have the big conservative synagogue, Steiner's place down here in Boca. He's retiring. They can't find a successor for him. I said, well, what you do is you kidnap Eddie Feinstein's family. You kidnap them. And you say, until Eddie agrees to be the rabbi here, we're not going to release his family. They may do that. I don't know.
They want
In
somebody
any
younger,
event,
I'm sure.
here's the other problem. It's a fundamentally business/theological problem. What is it that synagogues do? Right? Because if you're going to say if they're healthy, you have to ask, well, healthy in doing what? All right, so there's 3 things, according to the rabbis, that synagogues do. They're a Beit Tefillah, Beis Midrash, and Beis Knesset. Those are the 3 things.
Right.
Beis Tefillah, a house of prayer. How many people pray regularly? Almost no one. So that's a big problem. We don't live in a prayer community. Back in the 50s, when all the Christians went to church on Sunday, Jews who were trying to assimilate into America post-war, so okay, good, we'll go Friday night or Saturday morning to the synagogue. And that'll show that we're also part of an America that's religious. That ain't true anymore. The largest group, according to the Pew survey, of people that they surveyed about their religious affiliation are people who say none, none.
N-O-N-E-N.
There's essays called The Rise of the Nuns.
Right.
And so we live in a culture that's increasingly secular. That's a problem. We also live in a culture in which liberal religious groups, which have tied themselves to liberal political groups, are now suffering the fate of being on the wrong side of what a lot of Americans believe. And that's a problem. Synagogues that have become political outposts rather than spiritual outposts.
Mm-hmm.
But and then there's other issues. One is, how do you pay the salaries that synagogues pay to rabbis?
Mm-hmm.
I say this as a retired rabbi who is grateful and thankful to my synagogue for every single dollar that they ever paid to me to support my family, as I know you are.
Mm-hmm.
But the numbers, and I know the numbers because Tommy and I spoke everywhere, 150 lectures a year for 20 years. I know the numbers of what priests make, what ministers make. It ain't like what we make.
Yeah.
It isn't even close to what we make. So number one, you have a tremendous overhead for rabbis, and it's hard. Basically, the numbers work out this way.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're somewhere close to 600-700 families, full dues paying families, you can't afford one rabbi. That it takes about 600 families to pay for one rabbi. And there aren't that many synagogues that have 600-700 families. Some of them have 2-3 rabbis, and they have 200-300 members. Now, so that's the cost of rabbis. And of course, you have the cost of the building and the teachers and so on. The other financial thing that's bleeding the congregations is that they don't have any auxiliary revenue streams. The only revenue they have is dues and contributions. That's it. Dues and contributions. And most people look at their dues as if they're contributions, so it's hard to get contributions. And the proof of this, that the only synagogues that will survive, I believe, are those who have auxiliary revenue streams. The proof of this is in LA, David's place, Wolpe's old place, Sinai, where the early founders bought that cemetery, Forest Lawn, right?
Right.
Out in what used to be the boondocks and is now interior LA. And all the funerals and all the burials and everything, all of that is revenue into them. There's a few synagogues, interestingly, in my travels in the South that have oil wells, actually, from that have been donated from families.
We've prayed for that, but it hasn't happened.
Normal auxiliary stream is either like Bethel has it here in Boca. They have a cemetery mausoleum. That's a revenue stream. The normal auxiliary revenue stream that's sustaining synagogues now is what you talked about, the school. And so if you have a day school, that's great, but particularly the preschool, before the public school gets them, you can have them for 4 or 5 years of tuition, and that's a revenue stream. And in Manhattan, for example, where you have to get your kid into private school, synagogues like Rodef Sholem and Central and others, they have a big revenue stream from the school. So to sum it up, unless a synagogue has 5,000 members, or unless it has an auxiliary revenue stream, or unless, like Temple Emmanuel in New York, which I wish him well, but on Friday night, you can go bowling down the center aisle and not hit a congregant. I don't mean to insult them, and they have wonderful rabbis, and many people go and pray there, and God bless them all. The point is that it's an older synagogue with older members and lots of money from before. They're fine financially, but they don't have the bodies. And then the final nail in the coffin is Lubavitch, is Chabad. They come along and they say, as they did in my community and others, they say, look, Gelman is great, he's fine, but look, you have 4 years of dues and you got to pay for this and this. Come to us and we'll do the bar mitzvah for free and we'll do this and this. a lot of people can't resist that kind of
Yeah.
offer. So that's my overview of why it's really, really tough to sustain synagogue life, and why the first indication of the future demise, which is the lack of rabbinical students, is now evident. And I wish it was different. And I wish the truth was more glowing. And I wish I believed more like you believe,
Hmm.
but I don't.
So I appreciate this, and I can't
No, you
argue
don't.
any of the facts. No, no, no. I really do, and I think it's because I think one of the things that's very important to say is that the kind of realism that you've brought to the discussion about revenues and personnel and religion
No one
and
ever says this.
no one says it out loud.
No,
Right. They're
no.
embarrassed to say it out loud because it's because it there's a sort of agreed upon fiction that everything's just fine, thank you. And I appreciate what you said. I think I'm not going to say a however, but I'd like to
No,
add
say it, please.
but I'm not going to argue with it. I think that everything you said is right. I still see something though. I still see a force that's driving people into synagogues. But the caveat I'm going to make is that those synagogues are not going to be like the synagogues you and I grew up in. That it's the same forces that are pushing people into synagogues are pushing those synagogues to change, and in some ways change fairly radically. And basically, I'll put it this way: a little bit of sociology, right? The very famous sociologist Max Weber studied the advent of modernity. And he said that we have in modernity a move from village culture, which was Gemeinschaften, to city culture, urban culture, which is Gesellschaften. And Gesellschaften, urban culture, is impersonal and it's commercial and it's transactional. And people that offers a certain kind of freedom for people because living in the village, everybody knows your business. Now you can live in the city and have access to so much more and the freedom to be who you really want to be. But he also pointed out that people miss something when they move from the village into the city. And what they miss is personal connection. And what they miss is shared narrative. And what they miss is shared language. And what they miss is the meaning that is derived from the personal connections of living in a bounded space and a bounded culture where memory still takes over. And I think that that drive is still very much alive. I always wondered why people join my synagogue and don't come to shul. Like they join the synagogue, but they don't like coming to services. And I ask them, and they'll tell me basically what they would tell me is that they're looking for an escape from the impersonal, commercial, transactional culture that they live in all the time. They want to be part of a place where people recognize us, and there's a sense of community, where there's a sense of shared language, where there's a sense of shared values, where there's a sense of shared narrative and shared vision. And I think that's what drives people into these institutions. Now, ironically enough, what's happened, of course, is that the culture provides for this, but in lots of ways that are not synagogues, you know? There are lots of ways, lots of places people can go and have a shared narrative and a circle of friends and dear ones, right? But I think that the synagogue does this exquisitely well. And because the synagogue has a language of transcendence, it offers something that the bowling alley can't offer, or the golf course doesn't offer, or the country club can't offer. And I think that's what's pushing people into synagogues. Now, that said, that synagogue is not going to be the synagogue you and I grew up in. People want more from it. They want relationships, they want personal attention, they want music that moves them, they want a religious life that's going to be deeply personal and deeply spiritual and not as formal as it was before. So I think you're exactly right when you talk about the empirical conditions that are eroding synagogues, but I still think that there's a very powerful sociological or cultural push of people into synagogues, and I'm anxious to see how it comes out. Like in many American in the conservative movement, I think in the reform as well now, there are these outgrowths of synagogues, these experimental communities. Here in LA, there's Ikar. And in San Francisco, it's called The Kitchen. And in Chicago, it's Mishkan. And in New York, it's Rumamu and Hadar. And in many other cities now, there are these groups of young Jews that have come together to build the synagogue of their own. They don't want the big institution. Now, they don't want buildings, by the way. They like to meet in gymnasiums and sit on folding chairs. God knows why. But it's part of the anti-institutional ethos of the place. But I see something encouraging in that. I really do. And I see something encouraging about the people that are coming here for us. So I'm not disputing what you're saying, Mark, but I'm not ready to give up.
No, no, and I'm not urging that you give up. And I think just as you've agreed with me in partial ways, I want to agree with you, and say what I've learned. It's funny how I knit things together in my life that aren't really knittable, but that's my nature. Yesterday, I went to the Amazon Fulfillment Center in Miami with my wife and some friends. They have tours there. And it's breathtaking to see what Jeff Bezos has built. And to walk through 1 million square foot place that can get you a tube of toothpaste that you wanted when you ran out in the morning, can get it to you by the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And when we left, I asked my friend, who's one of the world's experts on entrepreneurship, written the definitive works, professor at Northwestern and Kellogg. I said, how can anyone in anything compete with this? Right? I mean, how is it possible that anyone could compete with Amazon? We have here in Boca Raton a town center mall, that's what they call it. And it's very successful. Big high-end stores, that kind of thing. Rodeo Drive type stuff. And he said, if you go into some of these stores, they take care of you.
Mm.
They connect to you. If something goes wrong with your iPhone, you go into an Apple store and they have a Genius Bar. They have a kid, probably 18 years old.
My son did it. Yona was a genius, right?
Yes, exactly, your son. And they will stay with you, idiot that I am, technophobe that I am, until the thing is fixed.
Mm-hmm.
I am an Apple customer for life. I hope they give me something for plugging them, though they don't need my support. The truth of the matter is, if my wife was an unlimited budget shopper of clothing, which she is not, she could go into several stores and they would say, oh, hello, Mrs. Gelman. We have some things for you that we set aside that you would like, we think.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon can't do that. You can't do that with a click with your finger and a mouse. And so the answer is what is provided outside of the efficiency of the high-tech distribution system, which is going to take over everything in the world that it can, is smaller institutions with personal attention.
Right.
And when I talk to, you are way too modest to understand this, but when I talk to other members of Valley Beth Shalom, whom I come to love over the 7 years we were together there, and I would come and harass you in the Torah class. They're there because of you, Ed. They're there because they love you and because you love them, and because when they were in the bottom of their life, you were there for them. And so I have always tried to do the same for my people. I don't think I was ever as good as you, because no one's as good as you. But that idea of being there for a person
Mm-hmm.
is the reason that they will come. They're not coming because the institution provides community. It doesn't.
Right. Yeah.
Institutions have cliques. They come in, I've had it said to me 100 times when I go lecture. Oh, if we only had you as a rabbi. No. So we come on Friday night, and the cliques, and I'm not in this clique, I'm not in that group. So sometimes people in a community don't open up to others. In places where they do open up, it's because the rabbi opens up and says to them, you are not a member of this community if you don't open up to new ones,
Right.
and to help people feel welcomed here.
Right.
So I think that is the future. It's ironic that the Mishkan, this little thing, which led to the big thing on the top of the mountain in Jerusalem, the Temple of Solomon, will eventually be the thing again. It may be a small group. My daughter's in one of those new groups in Denver. And it may be like that. But the point is, and this is the real point for me, unless the synagogue, with all the personal openness, unless the synagogue does three things, it cannot succeed. Unless it is a place where people want to pray, unless it's a place where people want to learn, unless it's a place where people want to gather, it cannot succeed.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And I think, frankly, I found that it's the other way around, though. I find that a lot of people have difficulty with prayer
They do,
because it demands a lot of
but
theology.
that's what we do.
But learning, I find,
Well, that's what you and I
is
do.
a
That's
remarkable connection. All
without a
right.
doubt. That's why
So
we do this.
this week, as we build the Mishkan, let's hope that this next generation figures out how to build its own Mishkan. And it may not be in the giant buildings that the last generation built. It may be in, as you said, small groups in Denver or San Francisco.
But it will be as their heart tells them to give.
Nedivat libo, from the heart. Mark, thank you. A good Shabbos to you. Take care to everyone. Everyone is listening. A very peaceful and loving Shabbos. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.